Now, now I want to talk a little bit about the Second Amendment. I don't want to dedicate a whole lot. I don't want to go over everything. But I would be remiss if I did a series on gun control and I didn't at least talk about it. And it's a worthwhile study to go through and look at the jurisprudence for it. And I'm not going to cover all of it right now, but I am going to make a recommendation, and it is this. This is a DVD put out by the Second Amendment Foundation. I bought this at a time when you couldn't watch it for free. I believe it's actually up on YouTube right now, so if you just do a search, it's pretty good. And one of its merits is that it interviews a lot of people who are leftists, who are liberals, and who are very pro Second Amendment, and even, you know, not just the, oh, we need it for hunting, the we need it to, you know, prevent tyranny kind, and they're liberals, like a lot of civil rights activists. So this goes a lot into the history and the legal arguments, and I think I bought it for $15. It was well worth it, but you don't even have to buy it. You can just go online and watch it. And I don't want to cover the whole thing, but one very interesting thing is basically the roots of the Second Amendment are to be found in English law, and basically the English crown was a lot poorer than its European rivals. So, for instance, in the 100 Years' War, and actually a couple times before that, the English crown found itself in wars with France. And if you looked at the populations of the two countries and the relative wealth, the monarchs of France were far, like 4 or 5 or even 6 times richer than the kings and queens of England ever were. And so the only way that they would ever have a prayer of competing was if they did not maintain a monopoly, a state monopoly on the use of force. If they could only rely on an army that the king could subsidize and equip, they'd never have a chance. And so what they started to do is something that's kind of rare in the history of states, is to actually encourage citizens, actually mandate, I should say, citizens to become proficient. And in the case of the UK, specifically to become proficient in the use of bow and arrow and archery. And this is actually something that's pretty well known. A lot of people are familiar with the English longbow and the Battle of Agincourt. And basically, it's interesting because if you try and just take somebody, you know, you just recruit somebody and say, okay, learn how to shoot a longbow. It takes an enormous amount of time and training or whatever, and it's usually more than a state can ever give. But if you tell someone, you know, to start when he's a little boy and continue throughout his life, then he's all basically ready to go, mostly. And I'm told that the French, after they lost a couple big battles thanks to the longbow, attempted to just start training their own, and they found that they could not duplicate it without just allowing their citizenry to practice. And that's something most states are not willing to do. And in the case of the Great Britain, you know, they had all these mandates, and then, you know, as time progressed, that the mandates for using bows and arrows transitioned into harquebuses and blunderbusses and the early muskets and essentially guns. And many of these practices were carried over to the United States, and then they kind of, at that point in history, in the, say, the 17th and 18th centuries, they began to lose a lot of significance in Great Britain. The standing army became more important. There were fewer civil wars in Great Britain, but they became more important in the colonies, and they've become, I mean, they become ingrained in a way that they almost never really were in Great Britain. So I would definitely recommend checking out that In Search of the Second Amendment from a pretty good gun organization. That's why I didn't feel bad about buying it, because I think it's a good group, and it's pretty good exposition. And I don't want to get into the legal arguments, but basically the arguments that the Second Amendment only applies to the states or to the military, or it doesn't defend an individual right, those are so asinine that I'm actually surprised that anybody actually forwards those arguments. It impresses me that people are so bold that they will attempt to make that argument. I think it would be better for gun control advocates to just say, oh, it's old, let's just forget about it. There's problems with saying that, but there's no way I think that you can argue that, is this making me more unfocused? There's no way I think that you can argue that, you know, it's just a stamp for the states and not for the people. But one thing I do want to say is, even though it's good to be well versed in the Second Amendment, you should never use it as a crutch. I'm thinking in particular, I saw a video, there were some gun control people protesting the gun show. They had a little debate with one of the people going there, and they had a little back and forth, and at one point the gun control people said, well, we shouldn't allow private purchases without a background check. And rather than advance a really compelling argument, the guy basically said, well, no, because that violates the Second Amendment. So basically, he's conceding that it's utilitarianly bad, that maybe background checks would help, but we should just not do that because of the Second Amendment. And that just sounds really bad. He may be correct. He is correct. But you can make secular, non-Second Amendment based arguments, and you can basically demolish a claim that we need to have background checks. The background checks will lower crime, without having to go onto the Second Amendment and using that as a crutch. And so, yes, it's good to learn. It's fascinating to learn about, actually, but you can justify unrestricted gun ownership without turning to the Second Amendment. And so I would encourage people to do that, but you should still learn about it. So that's it for the Second Amendment, I think.